Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Reached His Breaking Point? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Hello all, I thank and welcome you as we honor and mourn the life of one who was taken from us far too soon. Inko Midoriya was a good and generous woman. The words that the pastor spoke swam and faded as Izuku's ears began to ring. This was really happening. He was really here sitting amongst people he hadn't seen since he was a child and listening to the pastor of the church that they used to attend speak kind and encouraging words about his mother. Flashes started filling his mind of the accident. Blood, sirens, red and blue lights. Looking back now, it all seemed like one big blur, but at the time it felt like an eternity. Izuku could have spent hours or mere minutes staring at the unmoving form of his mother until he was forced away by some paramedics who insisted on checking on him even though he was fine. Physically at least. It had been a week and the images stayed painted on the back of Izuku's eyelids. Any time he tried to sleep, all he got were nightmares. Any downtime he took was filled with unwanted memories and guilt. And heaven forbid he try to look in a mirror, Izuku doubted that he would be able to see himself and not break down at how much he looked like his mother anytime soon. Such a short amount of time, yet it felt like centuries of agony. Muffled voices sounded around Izuku, and he could vaguely see people standing up around him, but he wasn't paying attention enough to realize why. Dazed, he slowly let himself drift, the pain, the voices, the memories, all of it falling away until a heavy hand landed on his back and jolted him back to reality. Your mother was a good woman. I am truly sorry, Midoriya. Please don't touch me. The only response he could manage was a slight nod. He knew that if he tried to talk his voice would crack, and if he looked at the man beside him then the tears that were pooling in his eyes would fall. Useless. Crybaby. Coward. Izuku refused to cry in front of all of these people that he barely knew. Most of his life it was just him and his mom. Not much of anyone around, no friends, no family, no dad. But now that she's dead, suddenly all of these people care. Not when his father left her, and she was on the brink. Not when she was struggling with working 2 to 3 jobs at a time to try to support herself and Izuku. Not when Izuku was diagnosed quirkless and both of their lives shifted drastically. Not when the kids at school tormented and tortured him every day just because he wasn't like them. It's funny how much people care when you're dead. It's like that old saying, you never know what you have until it's gone. Izuku knew. He knew exactly how blessed he was to have a mom that loved and cared for him and did everything in her power to prove that to him every day. He was fully aware of what an amazing person his mother was, and he made sure she knew it. Izuku knew he had lost so much in his life that he knew when to hold on and appreciate what he had. So why was this happening to? How could life be so cruel as to take away the one good thing he had in this godforsaken world? It wasn't fair. The feeling in his chest was unlike anything he had ever felt before. It was clawing at him, digging under the skin and raking down, destroying everything in its path. It dragged its sharp claws up to Izuku's throat and latched on tight, slowly suffocating as the world closed in around him. No please no. Not here, not now. Midoriya couldn't breathe. His visor blurred and he gripped the edge of his chair as he tried desperately to SCK in whatever air he could. Pulsing pain erupted in his skull, threatening to break it apart, and he could feel his limbs shaking. This wasn't new to Izuku. He had experienced attacks like this before, but the pain that enveloped him was like crashing waves dragging him back under every time his head got above the water. Just breath. In and out. Come on Izuku, it's not that hard. He leaned forward and put his head in between his legs to try and control his breathing. He needed an anchor. Something to ground him, but his anchor was gone. She was ripped away from him and he would never get her back. How was he supposed to go on like this? The spiraling continued and he tried to hold back his sobs until it was physically painful, until his throat burnt with the strain and his head got dizzy. He couldn't break down like this, not here. Further and further down he sunk until he was jolted back to the surface by another pat on the back that caused him to flinch. Are you okay, honey? The voice was soft and light like a summer day, but he could hear the undertones of the storm coming. The sympathy and hesitation that came with these kinds of things. Once Izuku felt like he could look around without throwing up or passing out, he met the eyes of whoever decided to give their condolences next. It was Ms. Chiba, the shopkeeper at Mom's favorite flower store. She would go there at least every other week and bring home different flowers to brighten up the apartment. She always spoke highly of Ms. Chiba. She would say that she was a sweet old woman who would give her the best deals. "Oh, hi Ms. Chiba." His voice came out in a whimper as he stood up. He wished that his body wouldn't give away such weakness, but his mother wore her emotions on her sleeve and the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. "Yeah, I a dash." Before he could even finish whatever excuse was about to come out of his mouth, the little old lady wrapped her arms around him tightly. The action made Izuku freeze. He wasn't very comfortable with affection like this or physical contact in general, but he knew that this would be inevitable, so he tried his best to prepare himself. Guess he didn't do as well as he thought he did. "Please don't. I don't like being touched. But she's so nice. She won't hurt me. Please let go." Ms. Chiba sniffled in his ear and rubbed his back. "I know, honey, you don't have to be okay. But it'll get better. Promise." How could she know that? She didn't know what happened or how he was feeling. She didn't know the nightmare he was about to go home to, or wherever he was going to end up. Empty promises. Izuku hated them. The old lady was still holding on to him until he managed to wiggle out of her embrace as nicely as possible. He really did not want people to touch him right now. He bade her a goodbye and looked for an opportunity to slip out. This whole thing was a wreck and painful, and all he really wanted to do was go home. Maybe it was pity or simple lack of caring, but he managed to leave without any interference and made his way back to his apartment. The walk back was a somber one. All Izuku could think about was how he was being forced to leave his home, the place where he grew up, the place where Mom used to be. He knew that it was necessary somewhere in his mind, but the feelings of bitterness overwhelmed any sensible thought that he might have had. He was going to be staying in an orphanage for the time being, so he needed to go to his apartment to gather his things to take with him, as that the rest of the stuff could be put into storage until he was old enough to access them. As he got closer to the building, his memories started spilling over the wall. He desperately tried to keep up. Moments of his childhood, Mom, growing up, laughing, crying, all things he wasn't ready to leave behind. He tried to commit as much of this place as he could to memory, the squeaky stairs and almost always out-of-order elevator, the way that the deadbolt always stuck when they tried to unlock the door, the smell of lavender and cookies that was constantly in the air due to his mother's joint love of plants and cooking, the dent on the hallway doorframe from the time that Izuku slipped and bumped his head and ended up having to get 3 stitches, the warm light that always poured throughout the house because Mom loved the natural glow of the sun. All of these things began to turn sour somehow. Maybe it was because he knew that nothing would ever be like this again, or because he knew that this was the last time he would be seeing the apartment like this, so full of life, but as he looked longer he could see it slowly fading as reality settled in, and his eyes pricked with tears before he shook away those thoughts and went to his room to pack up what he could. It didn't take Izuku long to gather what he wanted. He couldn't bring himself to bring much more than just the necessities. Clothes and such, his laptop and phone, a couple books, the blanket that his mom made him 2 Christmases ago, and whatever pictures of her he could. The decision to take any hero merch was a difficult one. On one hand, heroes were everything to Izuku. Ever since he got diagnosed as quirkless, they've been his lifeline to his dream. He became obsessed with them, chasing after all of the fights he could, studying and analyzing all he could about their quirks and fighting styles, and buying as much merch as he could to support them. His favorite hero, All Might, had the most presence in his room. He was his hero, his inspiration, but all of a sudden it didn't seem as important. Mom had always been supportive, even since the beginning. She was there when the news broke, and Izuku argued for hours about how he couldn't be quirkless because he didn't have the extra toe joint, and when he finally accepted it but still pressed on with his dreams of being a hero. It scared her, of course, but she must have loved him more than she feared his dreams because she was right there with him every step of the way. Finally, Izuku made up his mind. He wasn't going to take any hero merch with him, but he was going to keep it and have it stored away. That way he would still have access to it if he wanted. The orphanage was something. The building itself was old and overgrown with vines and greenery, although some people liked that look, so Izuku didn't pay much attention to the outside. The inside was nice, sort of. It was a little cramped and cluttered, but that was to be expected when a lot of kids lived in the same place. Izuku went to his room so that he could put his stuff away and found that he was rooming with another boy. He was about his age and a little on the meatier side, but considering that Izuku was all skin and bones, he didn't think that he was a very good judge. The boy's name was Hiroto, and from what little he spoke to him and the constant glaring, it was clear that he wasn't too thrilled about getting a roommate. It didn't take long for Izuku to put his things away, and by the time he finished, the bell for dinner sounded and the two boys made their way to the dining hall. Hiroto didn't say anything as they walked, just occasionally scowled when he remembered he was being followed. When they got downstairs, the boy hurried away and joined up with what Izuku assumed to be his friends. Standing in the crowded dining hall, it was much clearer just how overfilled this house was with children. They all went through a line to get a plate and made their way to the 4 large tables to eat. Once everyone got their dinner, they gave thanks and dug in. The food was bland and not all that much to eat, but Izuku wasn't about to complain. He ended up sitting by himself, despite how overcrowded all of the tables were, and as he was halfway through his plate, a shadow fell over him. He looked up and met the eyes of his smirking roommate and a few of his friends. Oh no. Maybe this time will be different. Not everyone is like Kaken, right? Hey newbie, are you gonna eat that? Hiroto asked in a gruff voice. Izuku looked up at him and then back to his fork that was halfway to his full mouth. Hiroto's smirk twitched, and he slammed his hand on the table, making some of the food on his plate splatter off of it. I said. He leaned closer. Are you gonna eat that? His little group of friends behind him snickered as Izuku swallowed down the last of what he was chewing. Yes. Wrong answer. Hiroto snatched his plate and turned back to his friends, who were now full on laughing. Hey! Izuku stood up. That's my dash. His words got cut off by his plate smacking against his face and exploding into his hair and on his clothes. This sent the group into fits of gasping laughter and snorts as Hiroto set the plate down and let out a small, insincere oops. They walked away still laughing and talking about what happened, and suddenly Izuku wasn't hungry anymore. He decided to leave dinner early to go shower and get the food out of his hair. When he got back to his room, Hiroto was there going through some of his stuff. What are you doing? The boy froze and Izuku saw what was in his hand. His temper rose and his face got hot with anger. Put that down. The words were low and non-negotiable as they left his mouth. All he saw was this kid holding a picture of his mother, and his thoughts ran wild with all of the things that he might do to disrespect her, and Izuku was not going to let that happen. What did you just say to me? Hiroto turned his head to scowl at him full on. Deep breaths. Deep breaths, Izuku. Don't give him another reason to hate you. After another moment, Izuku finally answered, this time his voice much lighter. Please don't touch those. They're very important to me. Oh, a mama's boy, are you? The smile on his roommate's face was ugly and alarming. He had way too much experience with smiles like that, but he was too slow to stop it. Hiroto looked him straight in the eye as he tore the photo of him and his mom from top to bottom and flung the pieces to the ground. Stop it! Izuku ran over to try to stop him from ripping up any more pictures, but that was a mistake, and he knew it. Hiroto grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and slammed him against the wall as his fists shifted into what looked like rocks, and it spread halfway up his arms. Izuku cried out and felt his feet dangle beneath him, but Hiroto just laughed. Make me. You can't just come here and expect to be respected, you have to earn that respect. So, show me what you got, shrimpy. When he didn't do anything, the boy just slammed him into the wall again, harder this time. I said make me. Or are you too much of a wimp to do anything? It soon became clear that he wasn't going to get anything out of this, so after a few more moments Hiroto threw Izuku to the ground and scoffed as he walked away. Such a loser. It took some time, but Izuku finally found a place that no one really seemed to go near. An old janitor's closet, closed the door and sunk down as he began to let out his feelings for the day. He thought he probably spent an hour in there crying before he finally left and went to bed without another word to anyone or anything. Mom, please, I don't think I can do this. I wish that you were here. Wow, How can you possibly look worse than you did yesterday? The morning started out with Izuku waking up to an empty room. And he allowed himself to slightly hope that maybe today wouldn't be as bad as yesterday was. He was wrong. Hiroto snatched him away from breakfast and he and his friends dragged him out to the side of the building near the trash cans. Once they got there, they threw him to the ground and laughed at Hiroto's comment. His roommate kneeled down to where Izuku was and grabbed his hair that was thankfully less tangled than it usually was due to his conditioner that he used last night. Do you want to know something funny? I asked around a bit and learned a very interesting fact about you. Oh no. No, this can't be happening. He hasn't even been here 24 hours yet and… Do you want to know, guys? He turns his head to his friends who are nodding their heads with sadistic smiles on their faces. I heard that little Midoriya here is quirkless. Izuku stopped breathing. He suspected that this was what he was talking about, but he prayed with every inch of his being that it was something else, anything else. Hiroto yanked on his hair a bit and brought his head up. No wonder you didn't fight back last night, you can't. Laughter filled the alleyway and Izuku knew what was coming. It was always like this. He could feel the sting of his tears welling up in his eyes as he braced himself. This of course led to more laughter and taunts of how weak and pathetic he was. Deku, you're such a stupid crybaby. If you keep on crying, then I'll give you something to really cry about. The memories echoed in his head as the tears spilled over and ran down his face. Izuku hated himself. He hated that he was so weak that he couldn't stop himself from crying in front of these bullies. He hated that he wasn't strong enough to fend them off or at least put up a fight. He hated that he had to be such a failure that he couldn't even have the right anatomy to be quirkless. He had to be the 0.1% that didn't have the toe joint and were still quirkless. He hated that Mom wasn't here to pick him up and tell him that everything was going to be okay. The beating wasn't as bad as it usually was. The worst part was Hiroto's rock quirk. From what Izuku saw, he could turn his body into rock and even shape it into weapons. At the moment he just used big rock hands to pummel people, but it wouldn't be surprising to see the quirk grow to be used like that. None of the other guys helped too much with the beating, they just sat back and watched and encouraged Hiroto. By the end of it, Izuku was left crumpled on the ground feeling like he got run over by a bus and then run over again by another bus. He could already feel the bruises and knew that almost his entire chest and back were going to be covered in black and blue. At least he had the decency to not hit places that were easily seen. He would only have a couple bruises on his arms, legs, neck, and face. He probably had a black eye, but it wasn't the worst thing that he's ever had, and at least nothing was broken, that he could tell. The walk or limp to school was longer than Izuku was used to. His and Mom's apartment was only about a 6-minute walk away from his middle school, whereas where he was now was at least a 20-minute one, and not being able to walk correctly certainly didn't help. He was thankful, sorta, that he was able to stay at the school until he graduated. It would have been a nightmare to transfer and have to deal with being the new kid only a couple of months from the end of the year. The bell rang just as Izuku walked through the entrance and he had to rush to change his shoes and make his way up to where his classroom was on the 3rd floor. He tripped halfway up the staircase and had to bite his tongue to stop from crying out due to landing on one of the really bad bruises on his leg. Once he finally got to class, the teacher was almost done with attendance and he tried his best to sneak to his seat without being noticed, but his classmates had other ideas. Hey look, Deku is late. What a loser, can't even make it to class on time. Useless. Midoriya. The teacher's voice rang out above the snickering of his classmates and Izuku winced at their tone. Being late to class is unacceptable, you know this. His chest tightened and he could feel the growing pressure of his anxiety creep up. Why yes I know you see what had happened was dash. I don't want your excuses. You will stay after school for detention and maybe then you'll learn some time management skills. Izuku wanted to defend himself and explain that he had moved and so his morning had been a little hectic, but he knew that they wouldn't listen. It was always like this. He was just too big of a screw-up for them to overlook his mistakes like they do the other kids. They all have potential to be heroes and are on paths to greatness and Izuku wasn't. It's not like he deserves pity or exceptions anyways. He should have done better this morning. Sure, he couldn't have known that he was going to get jumped by those boys, but he could have walked faster or not tripped on the stairs. If he weren't so useless and pathetic, then he wouldn't have these problems. It's SCKS being quirkless. Stupid little Deku has to stay for detention because he can't do anything right. Is that a surprise to anyone? Didn't think so. Kaken's voice wasn't as quiet as he probably meant it to be, and he and his lackeys laughed as they passed Izuku's desk. Try to not be any more of an idiot than you already are. The teacher doesn't need you bothering them. He was right, of course. The teacher had to stay after class to keep him in detention, and that was just more of their day that he was taking up because he was so stupid. Stupid, dumb, useless, burden, nice going. You were late and now you're inconveniencing the teacher. I really am sorry. It was just him and the teacher in the classroom now. He was supposed to finish the stack of extra work that he was given before he could leave, and he was trying his best to get through the pile, but he must be stupider than he thought, because it was taking him forever. The teachers sighed at their desk where they were reading some book that Izuku didn't know. I don't need nor want your apologies, Midoriya. Just hurry up with that work. Of course, sorry. Izuku winced and caught sight of the teacher rolling their eyes at their desk. He needed to stop doing that, but he can't help it. Stupid. Just get your work done and leave. 30 minutes later, all of the extra work on his desk was completed and turned in, and he was on his way to his locker so that he could change his shoes and head home. Mom was probably going to ask why he was late, and guess I don't have to worry about that anymore. Izuku's mood plummeted. Dark thoughts and feelings encased him as he slowly walked out of the entrance and down to the gate, and so he didn't notice the movement next to him until he was grabbed and dragged away by multiple hands holding him and covering his mouth so he couldn't scream. It didn't take long for him to recognize the hands and voices of his classmates. They were the ones that always followed Kaken around and joined in on picking on him. He prayed that today's beating wouldn't be a bad one. All he really wanted to do was crawl in a hole and cry, but he knew that if he started crying now, they would just hit him harder. So, he would just have to be strong and hold out. Guys, maybe today isn't the day. Didn't you hear about Dash? Shut up. No one cares. Deku was late to class and had to stay behind for detention like an idiot, and he needs to be taught a lesson. The other guys grunted in agreement as they continued to carry him to wherever they were going. They had 2 people holding his arms and legs and then some around to make sure that he couldn't escape. They talked as they walked, mostly about normal school stuff. Some talked about Kaken and how he was applying to the UA Hero course and how they thought that he was going to make it in no question. Izuku agreed with them. If anyone was going to make it as a hero out of this school, it was Kaken. For one, his quirk was incredibly strong and perfect for being a hero, but not only was his quirk strong, but he was just strong himself. He always got what he wanted and had people following and sking up to him because they knew that he was just that great. He was the best at everything and worked his hardest to stay that way. Not like Izuku, he couldn't do anything right. No quirk, no strength, no backbone, no mom. Izuku could never be like that. The group stopped walking and adjusted their hold on him. Hey Bakugo, we brought him. Good. Izuku knew that voice anywhere. The voice of his childhood best friend, of the person who he always looked up to and strived to be like. Izuku was dropped to the ground without warning and ended up hitting the back of his head on the concrete on the ground, which sent spots across his visor for a moment. He wanted to rub the back of his head. He wanted to get off of his tailbone that was most certainly bruised now, but he knew better, and he didn't want to bring any more pain on himself than was necessary. Get up, Deku, you look like a slug laying on the ground like that. Kaken's voice demanded with a hint of a smile. Izuku obeyed and gingerly stood up and saw that he was in an alleyway surrounded by Kaken and his lackeys. He tried not to make eye contact with any of them and kept his head down as he prepared himself for what he knew was going to happen. This sent laughter throughout the group, and someone behind him commented, "It's almost too easy, he's getting to be no fun." That didn't sound very good to Izuku. Kaken scoffed and walked closer to where he stood. "You're so pathetic. Makes me wonder if it's even worth it to teach you these lessons." "I'm sorry." Sound rattled through the alleyway, a warning explosion. "Shut your mouth." Another guy off to the side sighed like he was bored. "Come on Bakugo, if you're going to rough him up, just do it already." Kaken turned around slowly and glared at the guy who made the comment, causing him to straighten and take a step back. "Don't tell me what to do." He growled and turned back to Izuku. He's right though, wouldn't want to make you too late getting home. Auntie Inko would have a heart attack. Bakugu! The unsure guy from before snapped. What? You can't just say that. Kaken's expression turned slightly confused as he looked at the guy whose eyes seemed to be 2 sizes larger than they were before, and he kept on darting his gaze back and forth between Izuku and him. What's wrong with you? You think you can correct me and try to tell me what to do? Sparks started firing from his hands as he took a step towards the guy. Want me to teach you a lesson too? The guy shook his head and lowered his eyes. That's what I thought. Izuku is sure that he probably said some more things after that, but his thoughts began to roll in on each other like waves. Thoughts of his mother and how he would never get to go home and have her worry over where he had been. He would never feel her too tight embrace or hear her quiet singing as she cooked and cleaned. At some point a fist collided with his face that jarred him back to reality, and he stumbled into one of the alley walls. Listen to me when I'm talking, Deku. What? I'm sorry, what were you saying? This just made Kaken's temper rise more, and he reached out to hit him again, but Izuku's instincts kicked in and he tried to dodge the blow but ended up running into one of the guys beside him, who shoved him away and right into Kaken's exploding fist. He crumpled to the ground with a hand holding the side of his face where the explosive punch landed. His left ear was ringing, and he could feel some tears roll down his cheeks defiantly. Ah, that was pathetic. And you think that you can be a hero? You can't even dodge a punch without screwing up. There's no way that you could ever help anyone. The words flowed through his right ear, the only one he could currently hear out of, and around in his head. Pathetic. There's no way you could ever help anyone. Useless, Deku, you'll never be a hero. Each hit was intentional. That's for ignoring us. And that's for being an idiot. That's for getting detention, kick after kick, punch after punch, and that's for the stunt you pulled the other day. How dare you try to save me from some weak villain that even you wouldn't be able to take down? It was pathetic and insulting. Bakugo hit him with another quirked punch to the side of his head, and a fresh wave of ringing washed over Izuku. Useless, useless, useless. Deku, idiot, coward, worthless waste of space, pathetic, weak. Izuku's chest tightened painfully to the point where he had to physically grab it with the hand that wasn't still holding his ringing ear. The words stung as they swirled and grew. He had heard it 100 times before, so why was it taking root now? Why was this getting to him so much now? I think that you can do anything that you put your mind to, baby. Oh, Izuku, you're kind and intelligent and strong, and you care about people. That's what really matters, not having a powerful quirk, but what's in your heart. I believe in you. That was what was different. Mom had always been his anchor, his lifeline, and now she was gone. And she was never coming back. Look at him, not even attempting to fight back. Laughter sounded around him, and Kaken began to walk away, followed by everyone else. They walked up to him and patted him on the back, and one even gave him a high five for his beatdown, saying just how cool he was. They were all exiting the alley's mouth when Kaken stopped and turned his head to look back at Izuku. You're nothing and always will be. Why don't you just do all of us a favor and take the swan dive so that we don't have to deal with your sheet anymore? And with that they were gone, and Izuku was left on the ground. Warm tears streamed down his face, but he was numb, no feeling, no pain, it all just stopped, and he knew what he was going to do. He had made his decision. Izuku's legs burned as he climbed up yet another set of stairs. Both fortunate and unfortunately for him, the school had a lot of floors, and that meant a lot of stairs to climb to get to the roof. The thought of having to climb 2 more flights almost deterred him from what he was about to do, almost. As he rounded the corner and looked at more and more stairs, he cursed under his breath and started climbing. What was a little pain when there would soon be nothing to feel? Conflicting thoughts chased each other around in his head. Thoughts of how crushed his mom would be if she were still here. Memories of her always telling him that things would get better and that he was the strongest person she knew. She was wrong. Izuku wasn't strong, he was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of enduring, tired of getting pushed around, tired of picking himself up just to be knocked down again, tired of hating himself. And God, did he hate himself? The darkness in his mind dissipated as the hope of relief poked through. He could only imagine just how nice it was going to be to not be here anymore. To not have to live in this broken and unfair world. The thought almost made him smile. It helped that he was positive now that he could do this without hurting anyone. Before, just the thought of what his mom would go through chased away any permanent feelings of ending it all, but she wasn't here anymore. She left him and he was ready to join her. Would they be together? Would they be happy? Izuku vaguely remembered the times where he and Mom would go to church every Sunday and read the Bible, but those days had ended a while ago. He didn't really know why they stopped going, but he remembered just how at peace he felt when he was there. Maybe if things had turned out different, he would go back and try to dive back into the faith. Finally, Izuku made it to the top of the building and opened the unlocked roof door. He wasn't quite sure why the school doors weren't locked yet, maybe not everyone was gone yet. He winced at the possibility of one of his teachers finding him, but quickly brushed the thought aside before he could lose his nerve. The roof was big, and had some benches where students ate their lunch sometimes. Their school hadn't had to put fencing around the roof yet, which Izuku was thankful for, although he guessed that after today, they would have to. Well, he walked over to the edge of the rooftop and overlooked the city. Their school was in a pretty good place, not too many other buildings surrounding it, but still close enough to everything else that most students didn't have to take the bus. The sun had begun to set and Izuku watched the sky transform with streaks of red and pink and purple. The streetlights and other light around the building had just turned on as well, making the whole scene absolutely breathtaking. Izuku felt silent tears trickle down his cheeks as he overlooked everything. He was going to miss this. Just how beautiful the world could be despite all of the crap it holds. Mom would have loved this. The breath hitched on its way in and Izuku allowed himself to dwell a bit longer on the scene in front of him before he wiped his face off and stepped up to the ledge. Big breath in and out. I'm sorry, Mom. I'll see you soon. And with that he let himself fall silently off of the building. Wind immediately rushed up to him as he fell. It was loud but also quiet. Peaceful. He could still see the sunset, and even though his tears got caught in the wind, he knew that he was probably crying again. He felt not happy, relieved. He felt free. The ground was coming, he knew it. He allowed himself one last look at the beautiful world around him and closed his eyes, bracing himself for the but it never came. Or at least he didn't feel it. But that was kind of the point of jumping off the roof, a quick and hopefully painless death. So why didn't he feel dead? One moment he was in complete darkness and the next blinding light surrounded him on all sides. He covered his eyes until they adjusted to the brightness of wherever he was, and when he finally looked, he realized that he wasn't alone. Right in front of him, maybe 6 feet away, was a figure in all white. Their dress flowed around them and made them look like an angel, and maybe they were. With the straight green hair in a half-up hairdo that Izuku knew all too well, they certainly could have passed for one. A choked sob escaped Izuku's throat, and he went to take a step forward but stopped when the figure turned their head to look at him. Bright green eyes met his and softened. Beautiful emerald green eyes that always shone with enough love and light to fill up any room they entered. Eyes that were wasted on Izuku's constantly exhausted face, but somehow fit him so well. The last time he saw those eyes they were tired, so tired, and sad, not for themselves, but for him. They knew what was going on, how could they not? Bakugo and the others weren't exactly subtle, and no matter how beaten or bruised he was when he got home, those eyes always met him at the door and welcomed him home. They always gave him so much hope and comfort. He had been trying so hard to be strong for her sake. He knew that she wouldn't have wanted him to cry over her too much. Not that he really gave himself the chance to. He didn't cry in front of people, and ever since what happened he hadn't had enough time alone to let himself let it all out. So he kept on building up wall after wall, reinforcing them and pushing back the wave of grief that only got taller and taller the more he pushed it back. He kept any thoughts of her on a tight leash because if he didn't, then he knew that the weight of everything would come crashing down on him, so he just kept on building up the dam. Further and further up. And now looking at those eyes again, the dam broke. Izuku's legs gave out from under him, and he sank to his knees, clutching his chest. Everything was coming back to him. All of the feelings of grief and anger and betrayal and regret. It all blurred together as he cried and let go of everything he was holding back. Was this it? Was he dead? His breathing shook and tears kept on coming so fast that Izuku couldn't blink them away enough to see clearly. It wasn't until he felt a light hand on his shoulder that he looked up and saw green through the tears and knew who it was. Izuku, her voice was soft and comforting, wrapping him tightly in a feeling of total peace with just one word. It was okay, everything was okay now, because his mom was here, and he was here with her. Oh baby. She placed her hand on the side of his face and then moved it to under his chin to lift his face up. You're not supposed to be here. And all of a sudden, everything around him came crashing down. What? His voice was barely a whisper. It was low and strained from crying, and he couldn't keep the shock from his tone. I'm not supposed. What are you talking about, Mom? I'm here, I'm right here, and so are you. We're together and dash. No honey, this is wrong. It was like a stab to the chest. How could she say that? How could she say that he wasn't supposed to be here? Did she not want him here? Betrayal began to crawl up his back and plant its claws into him. He was sure that his eyes showed it. How could they not? He was never good at hiding his feeling from her. And he was sure that she saw it, if her now pained expression indicated anything. He didn't know when he started shaking. Maybe it was when he was sobbing, or maybe it was due to his mother's words. But he couldn't stop. He searched her eyes. Searched for something, anything. Feelings of relief or joy to see her son, regret for leaving him, regret for hurting him, but he didn't know what he saw. It was too many emotions for him to understand. I don't understand. How could you say that? Are you not happy to see me? Izuku's voice broke and his eyes filled up once again with fresh tears that soon spilled over and down his cheeks. Oh no. Her arms flew around him and held him tight against her. No, 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 baby, that's not what I meant at all. Izuku sniffled. Then what do you mean? Reluctantly, she let go of him and sat back on her knees, looking at him with sad eyes. It's not your time yet, sweetheart. You can't be here. You have to go back. His breathing stopped altogether at her words. Anger slowly filled his chest as he thought of what he left behind and what would be waiting for him if he went back. No. What? Izuku dash. His mom tried to place her hand on his shoulder again, but he shook it off. No, I can't, I won't. But dash. You don't know, you have no idea what it's like back there. Pain entered her expression as she looked her son over. He was still in his school uniform. He didn't have any bruises or anything on his skin from what she could see. He didn't have a single scar that she had memorized one by one as they appeared. Even the seemingly permanent bruises under his eyes were gone. Her son looked healthy. And then he didn't. His appearance flickered as she looked at him. The clean and healthy image would flicker to what she knew he looked like now, pale, unhealthily thin, bruises and burns covering most of his body, and his eyes. He never told her what was going on, but she had always suspected. You don't get injuries like that from just being clumsy. Anytime she asked him about it, he would deny and deflect the conversation to other topics that he knew would distract her. But she had seen it, she saw it all now. She had been watching, and the pain in her chest grew and grew the more that she thought about it. It had to have been going on for years, and he just didn't say anything. How could he not say anything? How could he not care about himself enough to try to stop it? It hurt her to see the desperate look on her son's face now. It didn't surprise her that he didn't want to go back, she didn't want him to go back either, but that wasn't up to her. It wasn't his time yet, he still had so much to do and he didn't even know it. I know, and I'm sorry. For not being more persistent about what was going on, for not stopping it. She bit her lip and closed her eyes. You can do this, Inko, she thought to herself. You have to, for Izuku. I'm sorry for leaving you. Whatever composition that was in her son's face crumbled in an instant. Tears pooled in his sad eyes and spilled over and down his thin and bruised cheeks. For a moment it was only silence that stretched between them until the sobs finally came. She knew that it wasn't fair. It wasn't fair to leave him, it wasn't fair to have to watch over him silently, it wasn't fair to see and talk to him now, and it wasn't fair to send him back to that wretched place. But if only he knew, if he knew all of the good he was going to do, he would understand. Inko Midoriya's son was always special. The brightest and happiest kid you would have ever met despite the crushing weight of all that was happening around him. You'd never have guessed what he was going through, not that he'd let you know anyway. Izuku was just like that, good, kind, selfless, a light breaking through all of the darkness around him. He was strong, always had been, and Inko hated that her son had to be. He didn't deserve this. With everything that he's been through, didn't he deserve a break? How cruel could life be to keep on throwing obstacle on top of obstacle at him without letting up? He just needed to wait a little bit longer. The light at the end of the tunnel was coming, it wouldn't be easy, Inko knew that. And it broke her heart to know that more pain was coming for him, but Izuku was strong. The strongest person she knew. "I'm so sorry, honey." Tears of her own began to fill Inko's eyes. It wasn't a surprise, she had always been an empathetic crier, but these tears were not for her. No, they were for Izuku. "But it's time for you to go." Her son's voice caught as his breath hitched. "I don't want to go yet," he let out with his voice broken and quiet from crying. It pierced right through Inko's heart, and she couldn't help herself anymore. She lunged forward and wrapped her arms around her son's shaking form as she rubbed his back in an attempt to comfort, but she knew that there was no comfort for what was to come. She moved one of her hands up to hold the back of Izuku's head and keep him as close to her as possible. Shoo, she whispered in his ear, her own voice shaking. I know, I love you." Izuku's arms tightened around her as if it would keep him from leaving, and it was a few moments of him calming his breathing down before he replied, "I love you too." Izuku needed air. He didn't know why that was something that he needed to be told, but his body was screaming at him to wake up and breathe. He shot straight up from wherever he was lying, gasping and screaming and crying. Streams of tears continued to pour down his face even as he finally got his bearings and didn't feel like he was dying well as much. The tears confused him until memories suddenly began flashing through his mind and his vision got blurry from the fresh water beginning to spill over. He managed to get out through his scratchy throat that was in desperate need of some water and whatever medicine he could find. Izuku's body hurt all over. He couldn't even tell where the pain specifically was, it just was there. Physically, mentally, emotionally, all-consuming and crushing. Memories of what happened before started coming to him as well, and disappointment intertwined with the grief as it all began to settle in his mind. He wasn't dead. Crap. Anger soon took over anything else that Izuku may have been feeling until his only thoughts were stings of curse words and how he somehow didn't die and was back in this, wherever he was. His mind was going a bit too fast for him to properly take in his surroundings, but from what he did get, he was in a gray room that was dimly lit and mostly empty. On the back wall was a long line of square metal lockers. There was nothing on the bland walls except for the metal double doors on the other side of the room. He could feel that he was on a cold metal table with some type of cloth or blanket draped over him, and the only other things in the room with him were a couple of carts with tools on them and a metal double sink on the right side of the room. How could he have been so stupid? Jumping off of the school roof was not permanent enough apparently. Izuku thought that it would have been tall enough that it would immediately take him out, but he must have been wrong. That could explain why he hurt so bad, but if he had survived the fall then he wouldn't be able to move anything. So why didn't he feel like all of his bones were broken? A sudden chill crept up Izuku's body and his eyes widened at a realization. Why did he feel like he was naked? Slowly, Izuku moved his right arm, wincing at how stiff and painful the action was, and took a deep breath before lifting up the cloth covering him. Maybe it was because he was naked. But why was he naked? And what was that? Izuku examined what he could see of his body to make sure that all of him was there and finally noticed his chest. There was a large T-shaped scar going all the way down his torso that looked freshly healed. Did that mean that he didn't have all of his organs? He felt fine as far as he knew, really tired, but what else was new? What organs could you live without? Kidneys? No, you needed your kidneys, but maybe not both of them. What if they took his kidneys? Or what about his appendix? He was pretty sure that you could do without your appendix, otherwise people wouldn't have surgeries to remove them all of the time. Right? Mid-freak out, Izuku glanced around him and remembered that he was in an unknown place with no clothes on, a new huge scar, and had been there for who knows how long. priorities, he reminded himself. Find some clothes and figure out where the heck you are and then worry about your appendix. Gingerly, he sat up and searched around for anything he could cover up with. The place looked hospital-esque, so there had to be some scrubs or a lab coat somewhere. He didn't see anything that he could use, so that meant it was time for Plan B. Izuku carefully slid off of the metal table he had been lying on, his body screaming at him for the movement, and wrapped the cloth that was used to cover him around himself. He secured it so that it wouldn't fall off easily and moved to find a way out of wherever he was. The double doors were probably his best bet, so, peeking sneakily out of one of the doors and seeing that the coast was clear, he tiptoed out and around the corner. No one seemed to be around, but that didn't mean anything. Izuku still didn't know where he was, or what he was doing there, so he needed to keep his guard up. People began to pop up here and there, walking through the fluorescent halls chatting with other people or writing on their clipboards. They were all dressed in scrubs and Izuku felt his stomach drop as his mind wandered to where he could possibly be. Things started adding up until the truth was right in front of his eyes. He couldn't believe it. He didn't want to believe it. How could it be possible? It didn't make any sense, although a lot of things didn't exactly make sense at the moment. Shaking the thought away, Izuku carried on in his attempt to find clothes and escape. Eventually, he found a door labeled Locker Room, Employees Only, and felt a smile spread across his face. There had to be something he could wear in there. Once he made sure that the coast was clear, he quickly got into the room and slipped behind one of the walls just in case someone else was in there. They weren't. Izuku quickly found a pair of black scrubs in a locker that looked roughly his size. Guilt tugged in the back of his mind that stealing was wrong, but he had to shove that voice down for the time being. Luckily, he also found a pair of white tennis shoes in his size and was out of the door looking like he belonged there, well, as much as a middle schooler could. It didn't take him long after that to find an exit and sneak out of it quickly. As soon as he was out of the large building, Izuku let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. The fresh air felt good in his lungs and the chill of the night was somewhat comforting. The further he got from the building, the more his thoughts began to pop up and swirl around in his mind. He couldn't deny what he knew. He had been in a hospital, in an empty room on a table naked, and with no one. But he wasn't dead, right? There was no way he was dead. He could feel himself breathing and could feel the chilling air wrap around his uncovered arms. A dead person wouldn't be able to feel that, right? But then what was with that scar on his chest? And his mom. The memory broke through his walls before he could stop it, and immediately his eyes began to tear up. He had seen and talked with his mom, that he knew. Now how was a whole other issue. And he had jumped off of a building, wouldn't he have broken limbs or something if he wasn't dead? But he felt completely fine, other than the now dull pain that was slowly fading. He was just really, really tired, and it was beginning to catch up with him now that his adrenaline levels were returning to normal. I died. There's no way that I didn't, so why am I here? It's not your time yet, sweetheart, you can't be here. You have to go back. His mother's words rang in his ears and the reality set in, sort of. He had died, but he had come back because it wasn't his time yet, or something. And he was in a morgue because he had been dead, but wasn't anymore. Why wasn't he dead anymore? And without injuries no less, the only thing to show for it was what he assumed to be an autopsy scar. There were so many things that didn't make sense to him, but one thing was abundantly clear. He was alive, and he really didn't want to be. As he got farther from the hospital, he began to recognize the area and had confidence in his ability to make it back to the orphanage, even though he had only really been there once. Kaken and the other kids would often run him all around town and he'd have to find his way home from anywhere, so he began to study town maps and even some of the towns around as well just in case. So, he knew that he could get where he needed to go from pretty much anywhere. He got a few weird looks as he made his way down the streets and tried to not think too much about it. They probably just thought that he looked very young to be a doctor, but he had bigger problems to deal with. Who had found him? Who knew that he had died? Who knew that he had jumped? Did someone tell the school? What about the orphanage? What if he went back there and... His thoughts halted to a stop when he rounded a tall bush just outside of the orphanage's gates and saw a small group of the adults huddled close. He strained himself to try to hear what they were talking about, and his heart stopped when he finally did. Did you hear about that new boy, how he died? He committed suicide. One of the ladies shushed the other who had talked very bluntly and looked around. Don't say that too loud, you might give the other kids ideas. The blunt lady rolled her eyes and her frown deepened on her face. What kind of kid would commit suicide like that anyways? Must have just done it for attention. I did hear that his mom just died. Whatever, it's still ridiculous. No kid has any right to kill themselves like that. Mean, what do they even have to be sad about? School? Bedtime? Like, come on, one of the other ladies scoffed and the blunt lady scowled at her. You have no idea what you're talking about. The lady who had shushed them earlier placed her hands on both of their shoulders in an attempt to defuse the situation. Listen, it doesn't matter now. Some of the other ladies are already cleaning his room out and throwing his stuff in the trash, so we need to figure out who the next one coming is going to be. The group nodded and turned to head inside of the building, and Izuku stood there hunched against a bush, frozen. He didn't have a home anymore. They thought that he died and they were throwing his stuff away. Izuku took off around the building to where he knew the dumpsters were. He couldn't lose his things. They were some of the only things that he had left of Mom Ann, and he wasn't ready to let go yet. As he rounded a corner and got to the trash cans, he saw that they had already trashed all of his stuff. It sat loosely on top of some trash bags, thankfully. And lucky for him, there was an empty garbage bag right next to the dumpsters, so he grabbed it and started putting his belongings into it. That way he could carry it all easily. Okay, he had his stuff, now it was time to go. He didn't have a home. Where was he supposed to go? Everyone thought that he was dead, and he couldn't exactly walk up to a stranger and declare his resurrection. They just think that he was crazy, and then they would probably call the police, and they already knew that he was quirkless, so if he tried to tell them what happened they would probably think that he was lying, and then they would. Deep breaths, Izuku, deep breaths. He knew that he was beginning to spiral, and he wasn't surprised. He had nowhere to go, not a lot of money, and no one who knew that he was alive. He was alone. Izuku's immediate thought was instantly shot down as he remembered what had just happened and how death had literally rejected him just like everybody else. So what was he supposed to do? He knew what his ultimate goal was, but it might take a little bit more time than he was hoping to get there. Until then he needed some place to sleep, but where could he go? His thoughts longed to go back home, but he didn't really know what that was anymore. Maybe his old apartment? People probably had moved in already, but it didn't hurt to check. And it would only be for a little bit, just until he could find a loophole in whatever this sick game life was playing on him. Luckily, Izuku wasn't one to give up. 20 minutes later, Izuku was standing across the street from his old apartment building. Everything looked the same, the dim street lights, the creepy guys loitering outside on the sidewalk, the flickering outside light. It was as if nothing had changed, as if his mother hadn't died and he hadn't been left alone. He shook the thoughts from his head before they could poison his concentration. These could be dealt with later, but he needed to find out how to get inside the building and inside of his old apartment without getting caught or recognized. Turns out that scaling a building is a lot than you'd think. It didn't help that he was also trying to carry a trash bag full of the few items he still had. If Izuku hadn't literally just died, he might have been terrified to be clinging to a small edge on the side of his apartment balcony 3-4 stories up, but he was just chilling. It took him a couple of tries, but he eventually managed to fling himself over the railing and onto the balcony floor along with his trash bag of belongings, landing on his back with a grunt. This is the worst. I don't think that things could go any more downhill from here. But at least that means they have to start going uphill at some point, right? After a few more seconds of self-pity, Izuku picked himself up and tried to peek into the dark apartment, pushing his thoughts aside for the time being. It didn't look like anyone was in there, but it was still nighttime. If someone was there, they'd probably be asleep by now. Izuku racked his brain for something, anything he could do to figure this out, but sometimes there's only one thing to do. Even if there were people living there now, what were they going to do? Report a dead person breaking into their old apartment? Right, good luck with that. The only problem now was how would he get in? Luckily for him, he secretly kept one of the apartment keys for sentimental reasons, guessed that he was going to be able to put it to good use now, as long as they hadn't already changed the locks. Please work, please work, please. Izuku smiled widely as he slid the balcony door open and stepped into his old apartment. He didn't think that he had smiled since her death, ironic that the first time would be while he was doing something illegal. He quietly walked through the house to see if anyone had moved in. Everything looked pretty much the same as the last time he had been there. The police and storage company had taken almost everything out, so the place looked very empty with only a couch and matching chair in the living room facing an unoccupied entertainment center, bare walls, and a loud silence that was slowly suffocating Izuku. After a full walkthrough, Izuku concluded that the apartment was indeed empty, too empty. Even without the visual, everything reminded him of his life before. It was like ghosts of memories haunting him and casting an illusion in his vision to make him see the place how it used to be. The thoughts began to make Izuku nauseous, but what was he going to throw up? He was pretty sure he hadn't eaten for more than 24 hours. He looked in all of the cabinets and in the off-fridge and confirmed what he had already suspected. Like everything else, they had cleared out all of the food. Great. But at least he had the things from the orphanage. Izuku had kept a few snacks with him there, because he wasn't sure if he would like the food there or maybe get hungry in between scheduled meals. Luckily, the staff had thrown those out with everything else and Izuku was able to pick them up and stuff them into his trash bag. Minutes later, Izuku was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the couch with a small bag of chips in his hand and a bowl of toilet water on the coffee table in front of him. They had taken all of the dishes from the kitchen, but Izuku had kept one of his mom's favorite bowls that a friend gave her years ago. She used to use it constantly, so he thought that he might as well take it and continue to use it as she did. It gave him some weird feeling of comfort while also slowly filling him with melancholy over thinking of his mother. He had been subconsciously putting off thinking about her too much, but he was alone now, and nothing was stopping him from taking everything in. And boy was it a lot. Tears began to fill his eyes once again as he went over the past few days. The funeral, moving, the orphanage, those kids bullying him, Kakin and his friends, the jump, the interaction he had with his mother, waking up in the morgue. So much had happened and he was right back where he started, alone, only this time he was truly alone. What was he going to do? Izuku glanced down at his wrist. The watch he was wearing was one that his mother had given him a year ago for his birthday. It was red, white, and blue, with a bit of yellow mixed in to look like All Might's hero costume. He remembered just how excited he was when he got it. She had been smiling the entire day and was practically bouncing on her feet as he opened the present, and when he did, he almost tackled her to the ground in a hug. He was thankful that it hadn't been lost when the orphanage threw away his stuff. The apartment didn't have any electricity, so he had to rely on his watch for the time and a flashlight he found to navigate around. The time read 1:15 am. Not too late, Izuku thought. It wasn't uncommon for him to stay up late studying or analyzing different hero fights he saw online, but to most people it was pretty late. Now that his adrenaline levels were back to normal, it was all he could do to keep his eyes open. He didn't know how he had not noticed it before, but he was extremely exhausted, like more so than he had ever been before. If he had the chance, Izuku could probably sleep for a week and wake up feeling very well rested. On the bright side, that pain he had was pretty much gone now, but it had been replaced by more exhaustion. It couldn't have been good for him to die and come back to life and then escape and break into his old apartment. A lot had happened, and it was time to just take a break for a while. He probably didn't have school tomorrow considering that everyone thought he was dead and dead people don't go to school. So, Izuku would take that opportunity to sleep in, something he hadn't done in pretty much ever. Mom was always an early riser, and he liked to wake up with her and spend the mornings doing whatever she wanted to because it made her happy and he just wanted to see more of her smile. He missed that smile. The next thing Izuku knew, he was waking up with a start drenched in sweat and hyperventilating from crying. It was just a dream. I'm fine, I'm okay, I'm alive. I'm alive. Once he finally calmed himself down, he rolled off of the couch with a groan. It would probably be a good idea for him to get up and change and see what time it was. It was difficult to tell from the sun outside. If Izuku didn't know any better, he'd say that the sun was about to set, but there was no way. Or maybe there was. After glancing at his watch, still half asleep, he jumped to his feet and swayed a bit at how quickly he had gotten up. According to his watch, it was almost 7 p.m., but that couldn't be right. He couldn't have slept for 15 hours, could he? He had been really tired last night and dying probably took a lot out of him. But, okay, well he could figure out what to do about that later. He was still in his soaking wet clothes and needed to change into something not drenched in sweat. He wondered about how he was going to wash his clothes. He might be able to go to a laundromat, and he did have that little bit of money he had stashed with him at the orphanage. Again, a problem for later. Izuku slowly shook out of the daze he was in and his senses began to come back to him. The first thing he noticed was that he was still tired. How, he had no idea, but it was what it was he guessed. The next was that he was hungry, understandable considering he only had a bag of chips for food yesterday. Maybe he would be able to stop by somewhere and buy something small. But would anybody recognize him? Izuku immediately pushed the thought aside. He wasn't important enough for people off the street to recognize him, so he could probably get away with going to get some food. Honestly, he just wanted to get out of the apartment for a bit. If he was away, then he wouldn't have to think about anything, and that's exactly what he needed. To not think. Izuku peeled out of his clothes and searched through his trash bag for something else to wear. He didn't have much, something that he would need to change if he wasn't going to be dying anytime soon, but he might hold off on that for a bit, just until he knew for sure that he wasn't able to. He ended up pulling on a pair of faded black sweatpants that looked closer to dark gray now and an old All Might hoodie that was 2 sizes too big for him. The outfit gave him a sense of nostalgia. It made him feel almost normal, like everything had just been a bad dream and he and Mom were about to go out to get groceries for dinner and talk the night away. Slipping out the window and down the fire escape was a lot easier than it had been last night. Izuku didn't know why he didn't just use this then. But at least he knew that he could scale a building now, so that was nice. When he got down to the street and began walking, people didn't give him a second glance. Good, he didn't need to be recognized and questioned about why he wasn't dead. Even so, he pulled the hood up and over his mess of hair as he walked and shoved his hands in his pocket, trying to look as nondescript as possible. Not that he ever had issues with that before, he was always teased about how plain-looking he was. Guess it was a blessing now. All the shops weren't too far away from his apartment, which he was grateful for, but he did need to pass a park on the way there. As he was walking, he noticed that there was a small gathering of people a little bit further ways in the park, kind of near the cemetery part of it. He almost brushed it off and kept on walking, but he caught sight of some spiky blonde hair that was too familiar to ignore. What could Kaken be doing in the park this late in the day? As he got closer, he saw the backs of 2 more familiar people and wondered what could be so important that the entire Bakugo family was here. That's also when he realized that everyone in the group had been wearing black and was circled around something. The closer he got, the easier it was to hear whoever was talking. It sounded like someone talking at a funeral, but why would... There beside the man who was speaking was a picture of Izuku. It had been taken a while ago. He was smiling widely, and his eyes were so bright. Izuku thought back to when that photo had been taken. It had been a normal day, nothing too interesting had happened, but it was the first day off that Mom had gotten in weeks, and so they spent the entire day together. He remembered just how happy they had both been that day. He hadn't smiled like that in so long. The man spoke sadly as he talked about Izuku and his life. The Bakugos looked sad from what he could see. Auntie Mitsuki's eyes were red from crying and Uncle Masaru rubbed small circles on her back in an attempt to comfort them. But it was Kaken that baffled Izuku. If you had asked him how he would have acted at his funeral a week ago, Izuku would say that he would be yelling and praising that he was finally gone, but he wasn't doing that. He wasn't doing much of anything really. It was hard to see exactly what his face looked like from where Izuku was hiding, but from his body language he looked almost regretful. But why would he be regretful? Wasn't this what he wanted, for Izuku to die? Shouldn't he be celebrating? The service ended shortly after that, and the small group dispersed. Honestly, Izuku was surprised so many people showed up. Granted, most of them were his mom's friends who must have still been in town from her funeral, but it was still nice of them to be there. The Bakugos began to leave too, with Kaken lagging behind just a bit. He walked slowly, dragging his feet and keeping his eyes on the ground, so it surprised Izuku. When his head suddenly shot up and stared at where he had just been hiding. Did Kaken somehow see him? What if he did, what would he do? He was dead. Maybe he would think that he was going crazy, or that he was haunting him. The thought made Izuku snicker a bit, that would be hilarious, but he wouldn't do that. His plan at the moment was to lay low and try to figure out what was going on and then leave. Hopefully his mom would be willing to see him then. Izuku didn't have any trouble getting something to eat, which he was thankful for. He didn't know why, but he got it in his head that he needed to lay low as to not draw any attention to himself. It didn't really matter at this point, but if someone were to come up to him and ask him his name or for his ID or something, he would be in trouble, so better to just keep a low profile. Once he was finished eating, he knew that he didn't want to go back home, so he decided to go further into the city and wander a bit. What was the worst that could happen? Hours later, Izuku found himself on the roof of a random building that wasn't too hard to climb up. He didn't know why he was up here or what he was planning on doing, but here he was. As he walked through the streets, he kept on getting comments on how he was too young to be out this late and what would his mother think of him not being home? He didn't have to worry about that, not that they knew that. But Izuku was tired of all of the stares and comments, so he headed toward a less crowded part of town. It might not have been his best idea, but at least he was alone now. But that also meant that he had to deal with his thoughts and feelings as well. Izuku looked over the city from the roof. Even from here it was beautiful. He wasn't deep enough into the bad parts of the neighborhood to be worried, and he could still see the city lights. It was the perfect place. Tears prickled at his eyes, and he cursed under his breath. He was tired of crying. He felt like it had been constant waterworks since his mother's death, and he was just so tired. Of course, he couldn't really help it, but he could still be annoyed. His mind wandered until he got back to his fall, or rather jump. How freeing it had felt, how happy he was. He wanted to feel like that again. But he was worried that if he tried it, he would just be rejected again. Izuku crawled up to the edge and stood up straight, looking down in anticipation. Even if he was rejected, he might still be able to see Mom, and that was worth it, wasn't it? And there was always the chance that it was a fluke last time. He took a deep breath in and began to lean forward until he suddenly heard a loud scream and scrambled back enough to fall off the other side and land on the roof on his butt. What had that been? From what he had saw, there wasn't anyone else around here, so who had screamed? A few weeks ago, Izuku's immediate reaction would be to go try and help and be a hero, but what was the point? He knew that he couldn't be a hero, he couldn't save anyone, he couldn't even kill himself. He was useless and would only be a burden to whoever was in trouble. The person screamed again, and their cries and begging echoed as they pleaded with their attacker to stop. From what he heard, it sounded like a girl was being attacked and no one else was around to help her. But he was useless, wasn't he? In an instant, Izuku found himself clambering down the fire escape, running as fast as he could to the girl's desperate cries. What was he doing? What could he possibly do? Not die? He was useless and would never be a hero, he knew that. He knew that he would never be able to be like All Might, and that hurt. But what if his bullies were right and he was only a burden to everyone around him? What if he showed up and just made things worse? Was he willing to take that risk? Another scream, and Izuku's mind was set as if his legs weren't already moving. Sure, he might be pathetic and powerless and weak, but he had to help. He had to at least try. The cries got louder as he ran, and he finally rounded an ally corner and found the crying girl being pinned to the wall by a guy who was 2 times her size and had a shark head. The girl saw him, and her eyes widened in pleading, begging him to please help her, and he was off. He didn't know what he was doing, his body had just moved on its own. He saw how desperate that girl was and knew that he couldn't just stand around and do nothing. It wasn't as if he could die anyway, and if he did, win-win. Sharkhead didn't even notice his arrival until Izuku hit him on the side of the head with a long pipe that he found on the ground. The hit didn't seem to faze him at all, but when he turned his attention to Izuku, his eyes were filled with rage at the interruption. Izuku was frozen. What could he possibly do? This was a mistake, and he should have just left and gotten someone who could actually help this poor girl. But the fact was that he didn't, and he was here, and he was the only one who could help her right now. He stared the shark guy straight in his eyes before he reeled back and smacked the pipe across his face, causing him to stumble away from the still crying girl. Izuku quickly jumped in front of her and whispered behind him for her to run away quickly, but either she couldn't hear him or she wasn't listening. Oh well, he had already gone this far, might as well risk it all, right? He chucked the pipe at the shark guy and grabbed the girl's wrist and dragged her away as fast as he could. There was no way for him to know how fast that guy was, but his top priority was to get her to safety, so he wasn't really thinking about it. That was until he heard his growl and his loud footsteps growing closer and closer to them. Crap! Izuku stopped in his tracks and spun around to face the shark head guy. He whipped the girl around behind him and tried to push her away. What? Go! Something must have clicked. Because she finally started running away and Izuku let out a breath. At least she was going to be okay. Him on the other hand, you little punk. Get your butt back here. The shark guy came barreling towards Izuku and it was all he could do to dodge him as he ran at him. You let her get away. I'm going to kill you. Don't I wish you could, he mumbled under his breath and steeled himself for whatever fight this was about to be. Izuku was defenseless. He lost his pipe when he threw it at the guy, and he didn't have any other weapons on him. It also didn't help that he didn't know how to fight either. Too late for that though. The guy charged again and Izuku jumped out of the way at the last second, causing him to ram straight into the side of a building. Izuku stared at the dazed shark guy. He really hadn't meant to do that. He couldn't stop himself from letting out a small laugh as he realized what had just happened, and this of course made Sharkhead even angrier. That was good. Anger made people stupid and reckless. If Izuku could keep on letting him hurt himself, then he might actually get out of this alive. Suddenly thankful that they were in a narrow alley, Izuku kept on trying to rile up the shark guy and getting him to run into wall after wall and take himself out. Of course, every plan had its flaws and Izuku did end up stumbling on his own feet and getting thrown across the alley and into the opposite building. Man, that hurt like a butt cheek on a stick. It wouldn't surprise him if he had at least one cracked rib from that throw alone. The guy was a lot stronger than he looked and was getting angrier by the minute. But fortunately, Izuku was smarter than he was. The fight continued on like this for a while, Izuku dodging and baiting him to hurt himself and slipping up every so often and narrowly avoiding being ripped apart. Like he wanted to die, sure, but that just sounded painful. Finally, the shark guy stood up after running to yet another building and he swayed on his feet and panted loudly. He was finished. Izuku looked around quickly to see if there was anything around that he could use and saw a long plank of wood sitting against the side of the building he was standing in front of. Without a second thought, he snatched up the wood and ran at the attacker. Still out of it from his last collision, it took him a minute to realize what was happening, and by the time he did, Izuku had already advanced upon him, and it was too late. He began to hit him with the piece of wood until he was sure that he was out, but hopefully not dead. After a quick check of his pulse, Izuku's anxiety eased, and he sighed. What had just happened? He looked around and made sure that they were alone. The girl who had been attacked seemed to take his advice and had ran good. His eyes drifted back to the limp body at his feet and he nudged it with his shoe just to be sure that he was down. What was he supposed to do now? Call the police? Then tell them what? That a quirkless kid had beaten this man that was 3 times his size with a plank of wood? Yeah, like they'd ever believe that. Oh no, oh no. No, he had just attacked somebody without a license. If he called the police and they saw him, then he might be charged with vigilantism, but wait, could he be charged with using his quirk illegally if he didn't have one? Or at least didn't use the one he might have? Could they even arrest a dead person? Better to not chance it. Izuku scrambled up another fire escape. Those seemed to be his go-to recently, and once he was sure that he wouldn't be seen, he pulled out the phone that he had borrowed off of the attacker. It was password protected, but luckily you didn't need a password to call the police. The phone dialed and Izuku waited until the line picked up. The person gave their spiel and Izuku quickly explained what had happened while trying to not hyperventilate as he spoke. It took a couple of tries to get across what had happened, but once it was clear, the lady on the phone assured him that some officers would be there in 5 minutes and to stay put until they arrived. Once the phone call was ended, Izuku was going to throw the phone back to the ground for the guy but realized that his fingerprints were all over it. But he was dead, so how did that work? It didn't matter. He chastised himself. He tried his best to wipe off any fingerprints off of the phone with his hoodie and then threw the phone on the roof and stomped on it just to make sure that it was broken. The attacker probably didn't need it anymore anyway. With the phone broken, Izuku looked over the other side of the building hoping to find a dumpster, and it seemed as if the universe was shining upon him for once in his life. He chucked the broken phone into the open dumpster and smiled as it clattered in and broke some more. He then thought that it was probably time for him to bounce, but how he was going to do that exactly, he didn't know. Izuku could climb down the other fire escape and try to blend in with the people on the street, but what if one of the officers saw him trying to run away? That wouldn't be good. On both sides of him were more and more rooftops that were fairly equal in height and close together. That was crazy. Only someone who was completely reckless and had no regard for their life would. This was it. Izuku didn't know if it was the thrill or the possibility of him dying or just him being actually crazy, but as he walked back as far as he could go, he laughed and continued to do so as he ran full speed toward the edge of the roof and jumped. It was insane. Just the thought to even attempt something like this, but oh was it fun. Izuku landed on the next roof, falling face first onto the concrete but landing nonetheless. He shot up with a wide smile on his face. That was so fun. He wanted to do it again. And so he did. As he did it more, got slightly better. Maybe he should invest in a parkour class or something, because no matter how good he got, he still landed on his face every time. But Izuku didn't mind. He had been through much worse. His legs and lungs burned as he ran and jumped from building to building. The adrenaline pumping through his system helped to dull it though. Even the few times he almost didn't make the jump or barely avoided stumbling off the edge, was drowned in the pure joy that he was feeling as he ran freely. Izuku was completely entranced as he ran and didn't notice when another figure joined him in his little free run at first. It wasn't until he clipped his shoe on the edge of a roof that he noticed the person beside him, and his smile faded. Who was that? What did they want? Was he in trouble? What if they had seen what he did and was here to capture him? Adrenaline was replaced by anxiety, and Izuku missed his footing as he tried to land on the next building, sending himself tumbling across the roof. Izuku rolled over with a groan to see the figure landing gracefully and silently and couldn't help but gawk at them. How were they so good at that? Would Izuku be able to be that good? Slowly the figure walked over to him and bent down as they stood over him. The night was dark, and so it was hard for Izuku to see exactly who it was, but there was a street lamp close so that he could see enough. Long dark hair fell around the figure's face and dark, tired eyes stared at him questioningly. Izuku knew this person, but how? He took in the rest of their outfit to try to figure it out. They were in a black jumpsuit that was baggy but fit them at the same time, with a yellow utility belt around their waist that matched the yellow goggles that hung around their neck on top of what looked like a large gray scarf. Oh my god. Eraserhead. Izuku's eyes widened as he recognized one of his all-time favorite heroes. Eraserhead was an underground hero that almost nobody knew about, but Izuku had been obsessed with him because he fought almost completely quirkless. Not to mention that he was just so freaking cool. The hero's face scrunched in confusion as he continued to look at Izuku. Oh my gosh. It's really you. You're really here, and you were jumping across the rooftops with he, and you saw me absolutely eat it. Izuku slapped his hands over his now blushing face as he realized just how embarrassing that was. Great job, Izuku. Of course you would make a complete idiot of yourself in front of your favorite hero. Just like the useless Deku you are. He probably thinks that you're such a loser for wiping out on that jump that was so easy. Gosh dang it. Kid Dash. Eraserhead cleared his throat and looked away. He probably couldn't stand to look at such a failure. Are you alright? That was quite the fall. Izuku's face burned even hotter in embarrassment. Why yeah, I'm good. Sorry you had to see that. Slowly, Izuku stood up and stared at the ground so that he didn't have to see the hero's disappointed look on his face. There was a small chuckle that was quickly covered up with a cough. Nah, you're good. It happens to the best of us. But, what are you doing running across rooftops in this part of town? Isn't it a bit past your bedtime? This caused Izuku to look up and glare at the smirking hero. The glare only lasted a second before he dropped it and went back to avoiding eye contact. Just having fun and enjoying the views. What about you? He chanced to peek at the hero's expression and found it unimpressed, as if he could see right through Izuku. I'm a hero, it's kind of my job to patrol these roofs. Right. Stupid. Stupid idiot. Well, I'd better be going. It was nice to meet you, Eraserhead. Izuku let out a nervous chuckle and turned to run away from this disaster as fast as he could. Unfortunately, he instead found himself wrapped up in something that Eraser was holding, and my gosh. This is your famous capture weapon that you use to both apprehend and fight villains. The fabric isn't as hard as I thought that it'd be, but I guess for it to move as fluidly as it does, it has to be at least a little flimsy, but then how is it so strong and sturdy dash? Whoa kid, I'm going to need you to slow down. Izuku hadn't even realized that he had been rambling and quickly snapped his mouth shut. If he had done that in front of Kaken or any of his classmates, they would have screamed at him and then pulled him aside after school to teach him a lesson. What if it annoyed Eraser like it did everyone else? He already probably hated him for having to watch him make such a fool out of himself, and this would just be the cherry on top. Maybe that's why he stopped him, because he found him too much of a burden to roam the streets and wanted to arrest him or something. Izuku felt like crying, and he could feel the familiar burning feeling in the back of his throat, but he refused to cry. He was tired of crying in general, but he would not cry like a baby in front of his favorite hero. So, his expression shut off completely instead. This caused the fabric around him to loosen a bit as Eraser faltered at the change in Izuku's face. The hero's eyes turned concerned in an instant and he took a step closer. Hey, are you okay? Izuku wanted to answer, but he knew that if he did then he'd probably cry. Although, not answering wasn't much better. He was worrying Eraserhead unnecessarily and he couldn't even apologize for burdening him without breaking down. God, he really was a failure. Kid. A hand snapped in front of his face and Izuku allowed himself to glance at the hero beside him. Hey, what just happened? Swallowing the last bit of his emotions, Izuku closed his eyes and took a breath. Nothing, but I really do need to be getting home. He somehow managed to wiggle out of the loose capture weapon and began to literally run away. Wait. Eraser's calls behind him were getting louder as he assumed that the hero ran after him, but he ignored it. He had already caused enough trouble tonight and he really didn't want to cause any more. Especially for Eraserhead. So he ran. It wasn't a secret that Eraser was faster and better at this than he was, but Izuku was still pretty speedy. He was also small and slippery, and he knew that he could escape from him. After all, he had plenty of practice. Guess all those years of running and hiding from his classmates were finally going to pay off. Too bad he had to run away from one of his favorite heroes. But what if he started to ask questions? What was he going to say? Yeah, my name is Izuku Midoriya, you know, that kid that committed suicide last week? That's me. Oh, also I am alive. Bye. That wouldn't go over very well. He knew as he clumsily landed on the third building over that he wouldn't be able to outrun this. He knew that from the start, but it was a lot more prevalent now. He needed a way to slip away, but how that would work? It was Izuku's favorite thing, a fire escape, and a small one that a grown man would have trouble navigating quickly while trying to catch a small child, teenager. It was Izuku's best bet and only real idea at the moment, so he just decided to go with it. Izuku took a sharp right turn halfway across the roof and shot towards the fire escape. Once he got there, he quickly maneuvered his way through all of the pipes and poles that bordered the edge and began to sprint down the rickety stairs. About halfway down, Izuku jumped over the hand railing and tried his best to grab on top a steady branch of the tree that was right next to him. He grabbed on a little too early and ended up falling a bit further down than he originally planned, but managed to catch a branch anyway and shimmied his body onto it and near the base of the tree so that it would be harder for him to be spotted. Eraser would wonder why the noise of him clattering down the escape stopped and start to look around. He just hoped that the leaves protected him from the hero's watchful eyes. He held his breath and the hero tried to sneak his way down the stairs and figure out where he had gone. Izuku had to admit it, even though he already knew, but Eraserhead was good. He searched places that Izuku hadn't even thought of hiding and scanned the area carefully before letting out a curse and jumping to the ground to start looking around the building. Not good enough apparently, Izuku smirked. Once he was absolutely positive that the hero was gone, he climbed his way down the tree and ended up on his back, of course, with the breath knocked out of him. He really needed to get better at this kind of stuff. if he was going to stay alive. The walk home was quiet, and a little nerve-wracking considering that Izuku kept on looking over his shoulder, positive that Eraserhead had somehow found him and was following him. But that was ridiculous, right? As he walked through the streets he couldn't help but run his hand through his hair, a nervous habit he picked up sometimes when he was particularly stressed about something. Hence, Eraserhead now knew what he looked like. Izuku's nerves eventually calmed when he got home and wiggled through the window that he left unlocked. Home sweet home. Shoyuta sighed as he walked through the doors of the police station. How could he lose a child? A child? He really was pathetic, wasn't he? What's got you so mopey, Eraser? A teasing voice asked as he sat down in the seat opposite them. Not now, Tsukachi dash. Shoyuta rubbed circles on the sides of his temples in an attempt to relax himself, but not succeeding in the slightest. Another sigh and then Eraser slammed his back against the back of the chair. I met a kid tonight. Ooh, how interesting. You're not usually one to take interest in anyone, let alone a child. It wasn't Dash, Suki was just teasing him, Shoyuta had to remind himself. Wow, he really needed to calm down. I don't think it was like that exactly. The kid was just interesting to say the least. His friend sat up in his chair and rested his elbows on his knees. Do tell. Aizawa rolled his eyes. I don't know, I was patrolling and out of the corner of my eye I see this tiny figure flying across the rooftops, so I obviously go to investigate and find out it's this kid in an All Might hoodie. The kid is just free running across the rooftops like it's no big deal, and then he saw me and freaked out or something because he completely ate it. Well, that's certainly one way to make an impression. Yeah, so anyway, then the kid starts rambling about me and my capture weapon like he was a fan, which I don't understand, but whatever, and then his entire demeanor just shifted. What do you mean? When I asked him why he was running across the rooftops in that neighborhood, he dodged the question and then totally shut down. The detective hummed thoughtfully, that is interesting. The two of them thought in silence until Suki finally decided to break it. So what are you going to do about it? What? The kid, what are you going to do about him? The question shocked Shoyuta. What was he going to do? What was he even supposed to do? It wasn't exactly like children were his forte, he says as he is a literal teacher at UA. Nothing. He glanced at his friend's confused expression and rolled his eyes once more. It's not like he's my responsibility. I already have an entire class full of problem children that I have to deal with. I can't just add a random kid off the street to my load. He sat back in his chair and rubbed at his dry eyes. Don't look at me like that. Like what? Tsukachi tried and failed to look innocent as he smirked slightly at Aizawa, who narrowed his eyes at him. You know exactly what? It's that look you give me when you think that you know better than me. Well, don't I? No. And whatever. You're thinking you're wrong. Plus, what are the odds that I'd ever even see him again? Probably zero. Tsukachi's smirk just widened as he watched Shoyuta with amused eyes. You're doing that thing. What thing? The thing you do when you're trying to rationalize not caring about something. You can try to keep up your whole, I couldn't care less about anything act, but I know you, Shoyuta. I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't do that. Sure. Oh, and when you see the kid again, tell him hi for me. Shoyuta glared at his friend, who was barely able to keep himself from bursting out with laughter, and just decided that it would be a better idea to just leave before he could tease him anymore. If Suki was right, which, as much as he hated to admit it, was more often than not, then Shoyuta sure had his work cut out for him. Izuku was exhausted, but what else was new? He didn't even do all that much today, but he was still just as tired as when he'd woken up, maybe even more so. He slipped into his apartment and plopped down face first on the couch, and before he knew it, he was out. The next morning, he would wake up only slightly better rested than the night before, which was extremely annoying, but what could you do? Izuku took the time to take inventory or all of the things he had. Some clothes, a few pictures, mom's bowl, some money, and his phone and laptop, both of which were dead and couldn't be charged because they had cut off their power since no one was supposed to be living there. Not a lot, but better than it could be. He was just thankful that the orphanage hadn't decided to take any of his stuff for their own or broken anything when they threw it out. It was the little things. Then, Izuku decided to take advantage of the daylight trickling throughout the apartment to clean it up a bit. He didn't have much to do so with, but he could at least wipe some things down and do a little sweep. The moving company hadn't taken much of the cleaning stuff. Maybe they had thought that the next people to move in could use it or something. By the time he was finished, the place smelled clean and felt a lot better. It made Izuku happy. This was absolutely something Mom would have done, and the thought of her cleaning away at a supposed vacant apartment made him smile softly. The thought only lasted a moment before his smile faded again. What was he supposed to do now? Who knew that being dead would be this boring? Izuku looked out the window at the city that was just switching over to the nighttime. Streetlights were turning on, the sun was setting, and people were making their way home to their families. It was beautiful and sad at the same time. It was no secret that he was still tired and could probably sleep for another day or two, but Izuku was tired of sleeping. He needed to do something, to get out and move. And if he just so happened to fall off of a building in the process, then there's really nothing that you can do, is there? A quick change into some comfortable clothes, and Izuku was out of the window and down the fire escape. The night was still a bit chilly, so he stuck with the hoodie idea, only deciding to go with a black one this time around and some black joggers to round out the blend in with the night look. As he made his way through the city, he put his hood up, just on the off chance that somebody could recognize his hair, and slipped on a black face mask to cover the lower half of his face. Not that he was particularly worried about someone calling the police and trying to explain that they saw a dead kid walking around, but better to not take any chances. It took a second for Izuku to end up back where he was the night before, but once he got there, he couldn't help but smile at the race of his heart. This was going to be so much fun. This was it. This was the feeling that Izuku loved. Maybe it was the wind in his hair, due to his hood falling off, or the burn in his legs, or maybe it was the thrill of doing something dangerous again, but he couldn't help laughing as he jumped over the gaps in between the tall buildings. For this short amount of time, he felt like he could let everything else in his life fall away. He could forget about all of the crap that he's had to deal with and his current dumpster fire of a home life. He could just focus on running and trying not to fall. It almost made him happy to be. No, that wasn't it. This was just a good distractor, that's all. Well, at least it was until Izuku stopped short at the sound of commotion somewhere a building over. Maybe he underestimated how safe this area was, because this would be the second time he had run into an altercation of some sort here. It was honestly getting annoying. It was just as he had expected. Some thugs were ganging up on a scrawny man who looked scared out of his wits. 3-on-1 didn't seem very fair, but Izuku guessed that those kinds of things didn't matter to people like that. He would know. The 3 thugs looked tough, each of them large and well-built. It would be difficult for him to take on all of them even with the element of surprise. Izuku really should go get someone who would be better suited to handle this kind of situation. Bang bang. Gunshots sounded and echoed through the alleyway. Izuku had just begun to walk away to find someone else to help, but froze mid-step. Stupid Deku, you really think that you can be a hero? You're just a quirkless weakling. How do you expect to fight villains if you won't even fight me? Look at him flinch. What? Are you scared of Bakugo? How pathetic dash. A quiet ringing filled his left ear, a phantom of the injury he had received from Kaken. His limbs locked up as his heart began to race. This was a new feeling. Izuku knew just how powerful and scary Kaken's quirk could be, but he had never been this afraid of it, had he? Memories of explosions going off in his face and beating him until he was almost unconscious on the ground swirled in his head. This was a lot. He didn't think that those times that Kaken and his lackeys had ganged up on him had affected him that much, but maybe he was wrong. Another shot shook him from his thoughts, and Izuku could see the scrawny man cowering on the ground in a ball. Warning shots, to scare the victim into SBMSN. The 3 thugs laughed and made fun of the man as if they weren't the ones who were hurting him. It was wrong. He didn't deserve that. No one deserved to be beaten up and treated like dirt. Someone had to help. It was stupid. It was reckless. It was dangerous. But then again, when had that ever stopped Izuku before? He clambered down to the ground as quickly as he could, pulling his hood up in the process, and pounced on the thug closest to him. He jumped onto his back and held on for dear life. Did he know what he was doing? Did he have literally any experience in fighting or defending himself? Also no. But he did have a lot of experience with not dying, and that had to count as something. It didn't take long for Izuku to be thrown off of the thug's back and onto the ground. He landed on his shoulder and rolled a few times, but eventually stopped with a groan. The impact hurt like a witch, but he had had worse. Plus, now the three thugs were distracted, and if the other guy was smart enough, he could easily run away and get help. But of course, when had people ever lived up to Izuku's expectations? He just sat on the ground, staring wide-eyed at the thugs approaching Izuku, and did nothing. It took Izuku glaring at him and discreetly gesturing for him to go that he finally got up and ran out of the alley. Alright, that was good. Izuku's objective was complete. Now all he had to do was find a way to escape himself. Well guys, it's been nice chatting, it really has, but I think that it's about time that I get going. Izuku got up from the ground and made an attempt to bolt the opposite way that the other guy had gone, but he was caught by the back of his hoodie and yanked backwards. Oh no, you don't. You think you can just fall out of the sky and attack me and get away with it? The guy he jumped on held him up so that his tiptoes barely touched the ground. I was hoping. He gave his best innocent smile, but it did nothing against the three. Okay then, plan B it was, not that he actually had a plan to begin with. He stuck his arm straight up and slid out of the hoodie that was too big for him easily and scrambled away as soon as he was free. It took the thug a minute to realize what had just happened, but when he did, his eyes flashed red. That couldn't be good, but it would have been so interesting if Izuku hadn't been in such a dire situation. Was that a part of his quirk? Was it linked to his emotions or just anger? Did his quirk have something to do with his eyes, or was that just an extra detail? Maybe wait. Not the time. The thug tossed his hoodie to the side and Izuku's expression frowned. That was his third favorite hoodie. All three of them were now glaring at him, and Izuku got into a sloppy battle stance. He knew that he probably couldn't run away, and he definitely knew that he couldn't beat them, but he could most likely survive them killing him, so that was something. He was surprised when all three of them rushed him at once. Usually, villains fought one at a time. It was a stupid tactic, but one that most heroes were able to take advantage of. But apparently, these guys were smarter than he had thought. Izuku had just been able to weasel his way out of them surrounding him, but was met with a fist to the face when he tried to get further away. Since when had that guy been there? Teleportation quirk? How did it work? Vision-based, or maybe he had to know where he was teleporting. Not the time, Izuku. He staggered as his vision faded in and out, and his cheek throbbed where he had been punched. Okay, not too bad, but not the worst. He could take more. The one who had hit him ran at him again, and Izuku dodged easily only to be shoved to the ground a second later. Oh yeah, this guy was getting annoying, but how could he combat a quirk like? That was when Izuku noticed the gun that was right in front of his face. The guy he had jumped on smirked when he saw him stiffen and smirked as he ped the gun. How had he forgotten the gun? Oh my, he was an idiot. That was the only logical explanation. Not so cocky now, huh? This was bad. I mean, he would probably survive a bullet to the brain, but that couldn't be comfortable. And just imagine the kind of scar that would leave. He'd have to get really creative to explain that one away. Okay, no need to be so hasty, guys. This is all just a huge misunderstanding, and I'm sure we can work this out. The gun was pressed against his forehead, and the three guys smiled sadistically. No, I don't think that we will. Sorry, kid. This was it. This was going to happen. Alright then, I guess I'll see you soon, Mom. Hope you're happy to see me this time. Izuku shut his eyes and braced for the fire, but it never came. With his eyes scrunched closed, he couldn't see what had happened, but he heard what he hoped was the gun clattering as it fell to the ground, along with a few grunts, and the thug in front of him swore. He opened his eyes cautiously, and his mouth dropped at what he saw. The guy in front of him was restrained and lying on his side with a look of annoyance on his face while his two friends were unconscious. Slowly, Izuku followed what the guy was restrained with to a very done-looking Eraserhead. Izuku let out a nervous laugh and tried to smile. Hi, Eraser. Hi, problem child. Fancy seeing you here, huh? At this, Eraser just raised his eyebrow, and Izuku internally grimaced. That's a new look for you. What do you think you're doing? Izuku moved to sit cross-legged because he knew if he tried to stand up, he'd probably fall due to how all of his limbs felt like jelly. was glad that he covered his head and mouth. It would be harder to recognize him now, and he also felt kinda cool and mysterious with this whole secret identity thing. Not to mention that like 60% of his facial expressions were covered, so it was easier for him to hide his emotions. Well, I was planning on getting shot, but you kinda interrupted. That's so dash. Don't joke, you could have been seriously hurt or killed. Taking on 3 guys twice your size, really? Do you even know how to fight? Eraserhead just sighed as Izuku refused to meet his eyes, a clear answer to his question. It was as if he was having an internal struggle with what to say. The hero was not known for showing a lot of emotion, but even in the tiny changes of his expression Izuku could guess all of the things he was feeling. You know what? Stay. He turned to the thug on the ground that was under his shoe and quickly knocked him out so that he couldn't attempt to fight or run away. I have to get these guys down to the station, but I will be right back. Do not go anywhere. Was he serious? He wasn't Izuku's dad, he couldn't tell him what to do. Did he seriously think that he would obey Dash? As if Eraser could read his thoughts, he glared at Izuku and activated his quirk, which was terrifying. His eyes glowed a threatening shade of crimson and his hair floated upwards and away from his face. A built-in mechanism of his quirk? That was so cool. His quirk relied on sight, and it would be a problem if his hair kept on falling in his face, so the fact that his hair levitated when he activated it was amazing and not the time Izuku. It didn't take him long to realize why Eraserhead was one of the most respected and feared heroes of the underground. He was terrifying. The glare was enough to glue Izuku to the ground and make him never want to move again. Not that his jelly legs would let him anytime soon. Once Eraser was sure that Izuku was properly scared, he blinked, deactivating his quirk and began to wrap all 3 thugs in his capture weapon and drag them out of the alley. Well crap, he was really out here. Shoyuta sighed as he dragged away the 3 thugs that the problem child had been fighting. When he had passed where they were, it had taken him a moment, but once he caught a glimpse of the kid's eyes, he knew exactly who it was. Those eyes were impossible to forget. He didn't even know how the kid had managed to PSS off 3 random guys so much that they were pointing a gun at his head, but what really bothered him was how calm he was when he showed up. He had been patrolling and heard some scuffling and decided to check it out just in case. That was when he caught a glimpse of the kid's telltale green curls and the 3 guys threatening him with a gun. And the kid had just sat there, as if waiting for them to pull the trigger, like he didn't care. But that couldn't be the case, right? The station doors slid open as Eraser approached, and Tsukachi was not. Surprised to see 3 unconscious criminals being carted around by a very tired-looking Aizawa. He stepped away from his desk and joined his friend as he lugged his cargo to the interrogation rooms. Hiya Eraser, nice catch of the day. They're not my catch actually. The statement surprised Suki at least a bit, but not nearly as much as Eraser's mood. Usually, the underground hero was reserved and apathetic, but tonight he just seemed annoyed and tired, more so than usual. Tsukachi jogged to keep up and looked Aizawa in the eye. What's up? Did someone try to offer you hobo money again? Wano. Then what has you so said? Eraser waited for Suki to open the door to one of the interrogation rooms and then left the 3 criminals to 2 other officers who were standing nearby. Remember that kid I was talking about the other night? The one who was roof jumping? The detective thought for a moment, even though he knew exactly who they were talking about. He just liked to tease his friend and cause him as much trouble as he causes him. Oh yeah, you mean the one that you swore you'd never run into again? Did you tell him hi for me? It didn't come up. Eraser gave him a tired look, although that was really just his default expression. Anyway, I found him fighting these guys in an alley. Didn't you say he was just a kid? Against these 3, he must have some guts. Oh, he has something all right. When I showed up, he had a gun pressed to his head and the kid didn't even flinch. This was new. Usually, Aizawa wasn't one to get attached too quickly, but from what Tsukachi could tell, this kid had him caught like a worm on a hook. It was interesting to watch. Where is he now? I left him in the alley. Alone? And you expect him to just sit there like a good child? Well, I'm pretty sure that I scared him enough for him to stay put, but even if I didn't, the universe seems to want to make me suffer and will probably keep on putting him in my path. So it's only a matter of time until I see him again, most likely getting himself into another fight, but yeah, no dash. The detective smiled to himself and held in a laugh. Well, it looks like you've got your work cut out for you. Children are a lot of work. Are you sure you're ready to be a dad? I'm not a dad. I am a teacher and hero, and it's my job to protect people. He just so happens to fall under that category and is a child. Sure, just keep telling yourself that. This time he couldn't help but start laughing at the glare he was getting from him friend who started walking away. And I'm serious. Tell him I said hi, maybe bring him by the station sometime. Oh, I'm sure you'll be seeing him soon one way or another. Shoyuta exited the station after filling out some quick paperwork and began to make his way back to the alley that he left that kid in. There was no way that he was still there, right? But what if he was? What was he going to do? If Eraser was honest, he hadn't thought. This far, the only things he really had thought of were protecting the kid and getting those thugs away from him. He wished that the universe didn't have a sense of humor, because even though he had just met the kid, he knew that he was going to be a handful and one that only he could deal with. When he got to the mouth of the alley, he saw a bush of curly green hair sitting cross-legged on the ground humming to himself. Wow, the kid actually not that scary, am I? Hey, Aizawa called out. Izuku's head shot up and he looked at the hero who had come back just as he had said. That was a new one for him. Oh, what's up, Eraser? I would have thought that you would have run by now. I've got nothing else better to do and this alleyway is peaceful. Shuda's brows furrowed. You mean the alleyway that you were just fighting 3 thugs and being threatened with a gun in? Yep. Yeah, definitely a handful. What have you been doing while I was gone? The kid hummed, still sitting on the ground when Shoyuta joined him. Nothing really, just thinking I guess. Aizawa could count on one hand how many children he had met that were as low maintenance as this one appeared to be. He was saying that in the maybe 30 to 45 minutes he was gone, he just sat here alone with nothing to do or look at and just thought. That sounds lonely. Yeah, he let out a singular huff of a laugh, but I dunno, I'm just kinda used to it at this point. Well, that didn't sound good. No child should ever have to be used to being alone. Where were this kid's parents? Shoyuta wanted to ask, but something told him that that was a very sensitive subject and that he should tread lightly. So, he filed that away for later and just settled for being with the kid instead. Me too. Being an underground hero can get pretty lonely, but I make sure to surround myself with people that I care about and trust so that I don't ever feel too alone. It's nice to know that you have people that you can fall back on when everything gets to be too much. Izuku stiffened slightly but tried his best to not show it. He knew how observant Eraserhead was, so he doubted that he had missed the change, but he didn't say anything, so there was that. If Izuku was honest, he hadn't ever really thought of Eraser as the type to have friends, but he guessed that everyone had to have someone. It's not good for people to be alone and have to deal with all of the crap life dishes out by themselves. I didn't take you to be the friend type. This won a small chuckle from the hero sitting beside him as he tried to hide his slight smile in his capture weapon wrapped around his neck. That's fair. I guess I'm really not, but as I got older, I realized that I couldn't do everything alone. And some people are more tolerable than others, but of course those aren't the people that I've found. Eraser rolled at his eyes at what Izuku assumed to be the thought of some of his friends. What about you? Do you have any friends? Shoyuta instantly knew that he'd messed up. As soon as the question left his mouth, the kid's face darkened and whatever sense of comfortability they had was lost as the kid shut down. I'm sorry I didn't dash. I should go. It was like a slap in the face. When the kid spoke, the words were robotic and cold. He left no room for argument and Aizawa was too thrown back to even try as he watched him leave the alleyway with no other words. Eraser cursed under his breath and rubbed at his temples. This was going to be a long journey with this kid, wasn't it? It wasn't until 2 nights later that Shoyuta caught glimpse of that troublesome green hair again. It seemed as though the kid had given up on trying to keep the hood that was way too big for his head up. Eraser would often find himself actively searching for his newest problem child, even without meaning to. He continued to patrol the same area and kept to the roofs and alleys where he knew he would most likely find the kid getting into a scuffle or running away from a fight. It was a week until the kid started talking to him again. Which was a good thing. Aizawa was beginning to get worried that he had seriously touched a nerve, but one night when he was roof jumping, he heard a young voice taunt him from below. He jumped down to where he was, and as soon as he touched the ground, the little gremlin was saying some comment that he knew would push his buttons. Shoyuta thought that he probably did it to distract from the criminal that was unconscious behind him, but he was honestly just happy that he was hearing the kid's voice again. The next couple of months continued like that. Eraser would patrol and run into the problem child getting into mischief. The two would talk and hang out for a bit, before they went their separate ways. In their free time when the streets were supposedly crime-free, Shoyuta would train the kid. It wasn't his first choice, but after watching him risk his life every time he went out due to inexperience and sloppy form, Eraser decided that if he was going to continue to see this kid, he might as well teach him how to not die properly. Ironic. 3 months after he had met the kid was when he finally made his official debut. Honestly, with the number of times Shoyuta found him fighting random criminals in alleyways, he was surprised he wasn't found out sooner, but one night Aizawa was perching on a roof looking out for some trouble or his gremlin and heard commotion to his right followed by police sirens. When he arrived at the scene, the kid was facing off with a criminal with some sort of skin armor quirk in the middle of a busy street. The kid barreled towards the criminal and tackled him to the ground. How he had managed to do that with how small he was, Shoyuta didn't know. The two went down and rolled a bit until the kid was sitting on top of the criminal punching until he finally knocked him out. By that time the police had arrived and the kid scrambled away before he could be caught, not before some videos and pictures were taken, however. That was how Serpentine was born. Apparently, a reporter had witnessed the entire thing and had talked with some witnesses and decided to name this new vigilante. Shoyuta thought that the name was pretty accurate when he saw the kid. The only thing that really stood out were his startling green eyes and the way he moved so fluidly even though he was clearly still inexperienced. Not to mention how slippery he was when he wanted to be. Oh, and how could he forget those obnoxious red shoes? He had only ever seen the kid in one pair of shoes. Did he not own any others? Maybe some that weren't as loud and noticeable? The night after when he met up with the kid, he was freaking out. According to him, the guy he had knocked out on the ground referred to him as Serpentine and mentioned the article that the kid quickly read through when the job was done. It surprised Eraser just how opposed he was to being known. Most vigilantes he had met wanted to be seen and noticed, especially younger ones. Hey Dash. Shoyuta attempted to try and calm the kid down, but he was too far gone at this point to do anything but listen. The kid paced back and forth, a constant stream of muttered words leaving his mouth as he moved. What am I supposed to do? I wasn't even supposed to become a vigilante, but I guess that it was inevitable with all of the fighting I've been doing lately, but does that even count? Well, according to everyone else, I am now an official vigilante, and that means that I'm a criminal, and that can't be good because the law is good most of the time, and I'm going against the law that's there to protect people, but I'm also protecting people, so what does that even mean at this point? Eraser really tried his best to follow all that he was saying, but it got difficult at times because he tended to backtrack and contradict himself. It was only logical considering this was probably his actual thought process at the moment, and thoughts aren't exactly the most coherent and easy to follow things. After another few minutes of constant muttering, Aizawa had finally had enough and moved to stand in the way of the kid's pacing. He almost didn't notice the person standing in front of him until he nearly ran into him and cut off his stream of words as he stumbled back. You've got to stop. The kid's eyes saddened, and something flickered in them before Shoyuta could tell exactly what it was. I'm sorry. I know that my muttering is annoying and creepy. It's just a nervous habit that I've always had, and I thought that I had it under control, but I'm really sorry if I made you uncomfortable or irritated by it. I'll make sure to not dash. Whoa, who said that I was upset with you? I dash. The kid paused as if to really soak in what Shoyuta just said and looked back at him with confused eyes. You mean you're not upset with me? You don't find me annoying or anything? Eraser just looked at the kid for the longest time. This was a completely different person than he had known for the past couple of months. It was as if he had two sides of his personality and certain circumstances brought out each one. It actually reminded Aizawa a bit of the time when the kid had freaked out or shut down around him. Usually that was a coping mechanism and a result of trauma, and that didn't sit right with Eraser. No? That doesn't why would I dash show you to stopped. This was obviously a sensitive subject, and if he dug too deep the kid might shut down again. He had to be cautious and treat this with care. What I meant was that you've got to stop worrying. Yes, people now know who you are, well, relatively at least, and that might not be exactly how you wanted things to go, but there's nothing we can do about it now. It is illogical to harp on things that we cannot control. It will only cause us more problems rather than solving them. Oh. And as far as the whole vigilante thing goes, what did you expect to happen when you go around beating up criminals without a license? The kid looked down and Shoyuta could see the faintest trace of a blush under his black face mask. I was hoping to stay invisible, you know, just take criminals down from the shadows and without bothering anybody. Well, I hate to tell you this, but that's almost impossible to do. You are going to be figured out sooner or later. Yeah, but now everybody is labeling me a vigilante, and sure I was doing acts of vigilantism, but now it's, I dunno, real. The kid sighed and rubbed the sides of his temple as if fighting off a headache. Ha, serves him right for being such a headache for Shoyuta. This whole situation was strange, and Aizawa was really trying his best to take it slow and one step at a time, but he was getting irritated with walking on eggshells. That wasn't who he was, but he also didn't want to drive the kid away. Gah, such a headache. If it bothers you so much, then why not just get a proper license? Suddenly the kid's head shot up and his eyes bore into Shuta's. No. His eyes steeled as the word left his mouth. What do you mean no? The kid didn't break eye contact as he began to back away slowly, and Shoyuta didn't realize what he was going to do until he started sprinting away from him and calling back to him as he ran. I'm sure you've got that one for me, right? And then he was gone. Izuku was so stupid. Somehow, he had managed to attract the attention of Eraserhead and even got him to train him a bit, which Izuku was very against at first, but after he assured him over and over again that he wouldn't be a burden, he finally agreed, and now he had tricked him into believing that he could be a hero. Why not just get a proper license? Like it was that easy. He said it as if Izuku wasn't useless and a bother to everyone around him. The only reason why he was even sticking to this whole vigilante thing was because he helped more people than he hurt. And don't even get him started on the media writing multiple articles on him and naming him Serpentine. When he had learned of what happened, he wanted to crawl into a dark cave and die there, as if he could. How did he get the attention of people and convince them that he was a proper vigilante? Although technically that wasn't vigilantism, because the textbook definition of vigilantism is the illegal use of a quirk against a villain, and Izuku didn't have a quirk. Or at least a useful one. So, was he now lying to everyone and tricking them into thinking that he was a capable vigilante when he wasn't even a real vigilante? Of course, it wasn't like he asked to be outed to the world, but he must have done something wrong. He always does. Izuku climbed through his apartment window and changed out of his vigilante. He had made some improvements in the past few months. He got a new black hoodie just for his vigilante work and some black joggers that he found was gifted. The only issue was that they were a bit tighter than he wanted. They weren't too terrible, just more of leggings than joggers, but Izuku would take what he could get. Legally dead beggars can't be choosers. He had a black utility belt that held 2 pipes he was just learning how to use correctly with Eraserhead, a small knife that he found in one of the kitchen drawers, and some very basic first aid. Izuku didn't necessarily need it, but bleeding out when he wasn't dying was pretty annoying and messy, so he decided it was probably best to have some bandages on hand just in case. He also had a few more things to help any injured civilians he might find. And he still had the face mask covering his mouth and nose, but he found one that was a lot more breathable and ventilated so that he didn't feel like he was dying every time he decided to go for a bit of a roof hopping. You know, as you do. And of course, he still wore his red shoes. The only other shoes he had were dress shoes that pinched his feet. Eraser had actually commented on his choice of footwear a few times. Izuku could tell he didn't really like them, that he probably thought that they were impractical and distracting, but he just couldn't bring himself to let them go. When he was little, he and Mom didn't have all that much money, but she would sometimes take him to the mall and let him pick out 1 or 2 things that he wanted to buy. He distinctly remembered this one time that he couldn't find anything that he really wanted until they passed the shoe store and saw these bright red sneakers in the window. Izuku was captivated and practically bounced as they stood in the checkout line of the store. He didn't know why he liked them so much, but his mother found it adorable and made sure to match him anytime she could by wearing something red. Sometimes she would end up looking like Christmas decided to come early, but he just loved that she was happy. The kids at school didn't like his shoes nearly as much as she did, but Izuku didn't care. Even though he felt guilty every time they had to buy a new pair because his classmates decided it would be funny to destroy or ruin his shoes, he just couldn't let them go. He kept wearing them, and eventually his classmates got bored and moved on to teasing him for something else. And the only other change he made to his costume was giving up on covering his hair and instead tying it back. His hoodies were always too big to keep the hood up, and it was annoying having to keep track of it during fights and stuff. But his hair was just as annoying. It kept on getting into his face and would frizz sometimes due to the humidity in the air, so Izuku just started to carry around hair ties, and it has done wonders, especially since his hair has been getting pretty long. Izuku decided that he would go out and shower in the morning after he got some sleep. You would think that after so much you'd stop being so tired, but unfortunately tiredness has simply become a part of Izuku. He had a theory that it had something to do with him dying, or whatever, but he couldn't really prove it until he managed to die again. Actually, that's not that bad of an idea. It had been a while since everything happened, and Izuku had thrown himself into saving those around him to distract from the whole still wanting to die thing. But maybe it had been long enough. Couldn't hurt to try, right? So, the next night when he went out, he had a set goal, unlike most nights. He still ended up getting mixed up in a few fights, but things like that just tended to drift to him. He didn't even seek it out. It was like he was a trouble magnet. And honestly, that probably wasn't too far off. It had been hours since he had left the apartment, and Izuku finally felt that he had some time to himself. After double and triple checking that no one needed help in the area around him, Izuku found himself on the edge of the tallest building in the neighborhood. He knows that the last time he tried jumping it didn't exactly work out, but it was a lot less messy than trying to find someone who would be willing to kill him, and who's to say that they wouldn't kill other people too? Better to not get anyone else involved. Izuku didn't trust himself with a gun, so that was out. A knife was too messy, pills were expensive, and he'd rather steal as little as possible. He didn't feel like finding any rope, and drowning just honestly didn't sound like a good time. Same thing with fire. Who knew that dying would be so much work? The night felt good. The air wasn't too cold or hot. The sky was clear, and this area didn't have too much light pollution, so Izuku could see some of the stars above him. He realized that he did this thing just before he jumped. He just looked out and took in everything around him one last time. It was like this last time as well. As crappy as the world was to him, it was pretty beautiful. Then came that feeling again, the feeling of free-falling. No regrets, no hesitation, no worries, just release. And hope. The ground came quickly, and before he knew it, Izuku was plunged into darkness once again. Shoyuta knew that he was brooding as he patrolled, but he couldn't help it. Once again, he had upset the kid with something that he said, and now it was all he could think about. Who says no to being a hero? The kid is so excited about every hero he meets. I would have thought that he'd jump at the opportunity to become one. But he didn't just say no, he ran away. Why would he do that? Eraser could feel a headache coming on, which was no surprise at all considering who he dealt with on a nightly basis. Speaking of which, he hadn't actually seen the kid at all tonight. It was weird. Ever since he knew him, the kid hadn't taken a single night off from beating up thugs and criminals, and he always somehow found himself around Eraser. So what was going on? He took to looking a bit more closely as he ran across the rooftops. The area he was in was a bit different than his usual patrol. It wasn't too far away, but the buildings were a lot different. Everyone was unique, and that meant that roof hopping was a lot more challenging. Not that it was any issue for Eraser, but it might be to Serpentine, who was still fairly inexperienced. Shuta's eyes had become pretty attuned to that green hair. It blended in pretty well with the night, but it stood out just enough to Eraser. The kid looked like he was scanning the area around him. He was stood on the tallest building around, and it must have an amazing vantage point. He might want to check it out himself. He was about to call out to the kid when his heart stopped as he fell off of the edge. Kid! Shoyuta raced towards the falling child. He must have slipped or missed his footing or something, and he wasn't coordinated enough yet to correct himself. Oh no. Eraser pushed himself to move faster, but he knew He knew that he wouldn't be fast enough, so he tried to use his capture weapon, but it hit the edge of another building and missed, causing Shoyuta to choke on his breath. By the time he reached the kid, it was too late. His small body laid at his feet, crumpled and unmoving. I wasn't fast enough. What was Shoyuta going to do? He had known this kid for a few months and now he was dead right in front of him. He had been worried that this would happen, he just thought it would be in a different way. That's why he insisted on seeing him every night and training him when he could, but all of that was in vain now. Minute. Tsukachi agreed to meet him when Shoyuta called him. It was clear that his tone had set off alarms in his friend's head, but he couldn't bring himself to put up a front. He couldn't really bring himself to feel anything either. He was just numb. Stuff like this came with the job. You would think that Eraser would be used to it by now, but every time he found someone dead, he couldn't help but blame himself. If only he had been just a bit faster, stronger, better. If he hadn't been a second too late, then they might still be alive. He knew thinking like that was illogical. He was human, and he can't expect himself to be perfect, but that doesn't stop him from trying. You can't save everyone. He learned that at a young age, before he even graduated. It was a lesson he knew he'd never forget, and he didn't want to. It drove him to be better, to try harder. He still missed him every day though. The pain had dulled over the years, but it never truly goes away. Shoyuta had begun to be known for his uncaring attitude and coldness after that. It wasn't his fault, that was just how he coped. He shut himself down and refused to dwell on anything that wasn't hero work. Was it unhealthy? But that was how it was. He wasn't as closed off as people usually thought, but he refused to let himself get attached, or at least, that's what he told himself. Hey! Footsteps sounded behind Eraser and he knew exactly who it was before they ever spoke up. The footsteps stopped just behind him, and he felt a firm hand on his shoulder as he sat by the body, blank. Oh. Yeah, I found him seconds before, I was too slow. Tsukachi knelt beside Shoyuta, never moving his hand on his shoulder that had become somewhat of an anchor for him, and examined the scene. I'm sorry. He was just a kid. I know. The two of them sat in silence for a few more minutes before Shuta's head finally cleared and they both decided that they needed to get his body to the morgue and figure out who he was. The trip was easy, and when they dropped the kid off, Eraser refused to leave. He just wanted to be with him a little bit longer, and seeing his face would help them figure out who he was quicker and easier. Tsukachi had no objection and sat beside Shoyuta as the two put in some discerning factors and began going through lists upon lists of names. It was harder than they both had initially thought. Sure, the kid looked rather plain, but surely there weren't that many green hair and green-eyed teenagers in Japan. Knowing some more things would have been a lot easier, but Eraser had never figured out the kid's quirk or even asked. He never saw him use it, so he suspected that it was probably a non-physical quirk. Hours passed and the two of them had come up with absolutely nothing. Shoyuta was getting frustrated and Suki kept on reminding him that the kid's body would need to be taken care of soon, which just put him in an even worse mood. Shoyuta had just agreed to leave and continue looking tomorrow after he got some sleep, and Tsukachi was on the phone with the examiner telling her that she could come down when slight movement caught his eye. His head whipped to where he had seen it, but it was just the kid's body. Nothing was around that it could have been. But that didn't make sense. Eraser's senses were spot on and he knew that he's seen something, so what could it have? One moment the room was quiet and still, and then next the seemingly dead body shot up with a gasp and ended up falling onto the floor. What the F?